What up, everyone? I'm Jędrek, and this is episode number 8 of the State of Modern. So, as you know, last week I haven't done the video because I don't think that many things happened after the bannings, or like a lot of things happened, but I don't think that Metagame was settled enough for me to reach any conclusions. And also I was trying different decks than blue-black that I've talked about 2 weeks ago. And with the showcase coming up this weekend, I wanted to talk a bit about it and about the metagame. First of all, Heliod is still the best deck in my opinion in Modern right now. And even though it's not very popular in leagues because of how tedious it is to play in leagues, and even though you actually seen zero copy of Heliod in both top 32s of the challenges last weekend, I have no doubt that Heliod would be one of the most popular decks in the showcase this weekend, and I think is a contender for the best deck in the format, the sole contender that is. Mostly because of how good it is against other good decks. So Heliod is basically my top tier plus, like it is the best deck. Then the top tier is Blue Red Price and Baron. I think these strategies are very good. Very fast, very resilient decks that are pretty good against most of the format and are very good at executing their own plan regardless of what your opponent is doing. Monastery Swifts will definitely gained from Uro exiting the format, and think if you are not gunning for Heliod, you should be gunning for this. Like with the slots, you are not devoting to Heliod. Then we have a bunch of like regulars, other decks that you can say that they're like tier 1.5, tier 2, whatever. I'm not really super into these tier ratings, even though I did the tier rating last time I've made a video. Because like it doesn't really mean anything what's like tier 1.5, tier 2. Like I like to use more like descriptive terms, and Heliod is the best deck, as I've said. Top tier is, I think, Monastery Swift Spear decks that, or more specifically, Baron and Blue Red Prowess, and then we have regulars, which is like the group of decks that are fairly popular, and it's not anything weird to, or out of the ordinary to meet them in your showcase or the challenge or anything, because like obviously in the leagues you can basically run into anything, but on these higher level events, I think you will mostly run into these decks. So my regulars are Blue-White Control, Tron, Hammer Time, Giant Death's Shadow, and Dredge. I think Blue-Red is not that, or Blue-White is not that great. People still really like Blue-White, and maybe they are not afraid, but they are not very... They're not very prone to change, and I think it's not only in Modern, it's not only in Magic, and many professional esports scenes that I follow, it's fairly often that people are very hung up on what they made work over the like extended period of times, and they don't really want to change it unless it's drastically worse than the alternatives. So that's one of the reasons I think Blue-White is still very popular, because I think it's fairly clearly worse than Esper, which is the deck that I like the most right now in Modern. The control deck I like the most in Modern. I think if you don't have any specific preferences or experience, playing Heliod is very good. Playing the Swift Spear deck is very good if you have a sound plan against Heliod. And then some other decks that are still pretty decent you can play. I will basically always play Cryptic Commands, so I think Esper is the best place to do so for the time being. But yeah, Blue-White Control, I think it's still winning a lot, or fair amount, because it's good against Heliod. Any control deck is good against Heliod, really. Or maybe it's not bad against Heliod. I think the matchup is close. a bit control favored because you don't care about infinite life, and if Heliod is not packing a lot of chokes and stuff, I think you should come out ahead more often than not. Um, and then, even though Path to Exile isn't that great against Swift Spear decks, you still got like Wall of Home and some other cards. I'd rather play Esper and Fatal Push, but like blue-white isn't like terrible or anything. I just think Esper is better. Another one of these decks is Tron. I think Tron is probably Heliod worst matchup out of the like popular decks. They can easily win against Infinite Life with either Ulamog or Karn resetting the game, or probably Karn the Great Creator in some way as well. They are pretty good at shutting off their Heliod's ballistas with Karn. They have a lot of different sweepers like Oblivion Stone, Ugin, and Heliod isn't that fast to reliably kill Tron before they assemble 7 mana, and Karn can exile Heliod. So yep, I think that Tron, especially with like a bit tuned sideboard to the Heliod matchup, is a very favorite deck against Heliod. I think if you run like the Glamour or two, and maybe like a Needle or whatever, but I think the Glamour is the best card because it doesn't get hit by Skyclave Apparition, and it can also deal with their hate like Damping Sphere or whatever. So I just think Tron packing some amount of the Glamours is probably the worst matchup for Heliod. Then we have Hammer Time. Hammer Time is still a fairly decent deck. Laplacian won the challenge with it on Saturday, and even though it's not that great against Heliod, I think it's still fast and consistent enough to be a major player in Modern, or somewhat major player in Modern. Then Jan Death Shadow. I think the addition of Tarmogoyf was very smart because the red-black Death Shadow was very bad against Heliod, and with Tarmogoyf and the Glamour out of the sideboard, you can actually put up the fight against Heliod. And the last one I have is Dredge. I think Dredge is pretty strong right now. I've been seeing a bunch of people who are known for playing Dredge over the years, and they gravitated towards Dredge once again, or towards Modern in general. For example, Mati Kizma is a person who's really known for playing Dredge, and I don't think he played that much Modern recently, but now with Dredge being back again, I saw him online a couple of times. Yeah, I think Dredge is probably the best graveyard deck in the format right now. There's not very stiff competition on this front, but I think Dredge is decent, and I think you should respect it by putting some sideboard cards in your sideboard, like some grave hate. One of the reasons I like Esper is that you can just play main deck Chaos Guile and make it a bit better pre-board. Because I think control players were kinda used to this matchup being good pre-board because of Cryptic Loop and Uro, and now it's pretty hard to win without a graveyard hate card such as Guile. Now I think it's a good moment to move on to my pick for the showcase this weekend, which is Esper. This is the list I've played the last couple days. It worked very well for me, and even though I don't like paying too much or giving too much credit to my league results, because I think leagues are fairly random and kinda soft, it's still nice to have like a good win rate, and I think it also can show you that your deck is just working on its own. You are not just losing to yourself. You can see how good your mana is in leagues and stuff like this. So yeah, speaking of mana, I think the reason why I didn't like Esper before, like after bans, I've built Esper as my first deck, and then I quickly just benched it. And I think the reason I did that was that I couldn't figure the proper mana base. And I think once you do that, it's actually not much to... It's actually, if you figure out the mana base, it's actually pretty clear to me that Esper is a better choice than blue-white or blue-black. Because you get the best of both worlds. You can play Teferi, Hero of the Minare, which is like an amazing planeswalker. You can play Kaya's Guile. You can play all these model cards. You get access to white sideboard cards, and you still get to play Fatal Push, which is by far the best removal spell in the format. And all of that for the price of basically cutting your Field of Ruins and getting a bit more shocklands than usual. But if you compare this to like blue-white mana base, okay, you are running like 1 or 2 fetchlands more probably and 2 shocklands, which of course it's a bit of a cost. And you can't play Field of Ruin, but the mana base is fairly clean, can support all of your spells. You have a lot of tough costs. You have blue, white, black on for Esper Charm. On turn 3 you have triple blue for Archmage Charm, you have triple blue for Cryptic, then you have double white for Supreme Verdict, and I think mana holds up pretty well. I don't think that Field of Ruin is that needed, even though Tron is somewhat popular. I think that Esper Charm is a very strong tool in the matchup, and I'm gonna get to that later on a bit more. So aside from mana base, one more remark about it. I would like to have another Castle Vantress in the deck. I don't think how realistic it is to fit another copy of it, but it's been very good for me. It's been overperforming, I think, and like the floor of being an untapped like non-basic island basically was as high as it sounds, which is like a decent land because it comes into play untapped aside from turn 1, and then it's just once every 10 or 15 games. It's a card that really helps you pull ahead. It's also very nice with Teferi, Hero of the Minari, untapping your lands, so you can dig through your deck really fast and stabilize. So you get less of these games where you land Teferi and then you lose after like 2 or 3 turns with it on the board. It's kind of frustrating. So aside from lands, 0 path to exile, which is like one of the most common questions I get. I just don't think that path is necessary. You got Kaya's Guile to deal with bigger creatures, and you can just favor the efficiency of Fatal Push over Path to Exile. And also, if you have both Fatal Push and Path in your deck, then you have to skew. You can't skew your mana base towards one color early on. If you only run Push, you don't need like 10 or you don't need like 14 black sources on white sources on turn 1 for Path, because you just don't need white mana on turn 1. You can just play a lot of Glacial Fortress, which is a very good land if you don't need white on turn 1, and you can just satisfy your white requirements with it. And then my 5th removal spell of choice is Eliminate, which is a 2 mana option. It doesn't sound that good, but the ability to answer mostly Liliana of the Veil and Teferi Time Raveler is fairly important, I think. And also Renan 6 to some extent, even though it's way less popular than it was. And I chose Eliminate over Bloodshift's Thirst, mostly because the instant speed is very important, and because to kill Liliana or Teferi you need 4 mana for Bloodshift's Thirst, so it's just not very realistic early on. Another card I wanted to talk about is Kaya's Guile. I think it's insanely underrated still for some reason. The ability to have this Swiss Army knife of a card, both in your main deck and in your sideboard, is very strong. And I've talked about Kaya's Guile before in my Blue-Black Delver video when I just splashed for Kaya's Guile from the sideboard. I just think that every time someone says that they want 20 cards in their sideboard in Modern because it's so hard to sideboard with control, I'm like, you can just play Kaya's Guile, and Kaya's Guile is basically 3 cards in one, because it's both like, it's a graveyard hate, a burn hate, because it gains you life, and it's an answer to like big creatures and to like boggles and stuff like this. So I think the versatility versatility of Chaos Gale is like super important and one of the most important draws to playing Esper. All these model spells are terrific, and the reason I like this deck so much. So speaking more of model spells, another question I've got a lot is Esper Charm versus Archmage's Charm. And even though I think the Cancel Divination split card is better than Mindrot Divination split card, you've got enough counterspells in your deck that the added value of like 10th counterspell by adding third copy of Archmage's Charm isn't that high as the added value of third copy of Mindrot effect in your deck. Also, because you can't run Field of Ruin in Esper, I think reasonably, Esper Charm is very, very important against Tron because it can allow you to win the long games with them often enough that you can sacrifice the early game a bit, and you will lose more game than Blue-White on the early turns, like turn 4 Ulamog or whatever. But then if you manage to disrupt them early on, or if they don't have turn 4 Ulamog, but like turn 6 or 7 Ulamog, you will win more games than Blue-White did because you have Esper Charm, which is very good. And the last selling point of Esper, I think, is Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Once again, a brilliant Planeswalker, a very, very good card. And the fact that it can't be exiled with Skyclave Apparition is just such a big deal, I think. Because so many people are playing Apparition. The Heliod deck plays it, the DNT deck plays it, the Stoneblade decks sometimes played it. It just being able to survive this Apparition card, and also the fact that he goes up to 5 counters on the very first turn and can help you interact with your opponent on turn 5 with untapping your mana. The card is just very, very strong, and I would urge you to play it more if you don't already. So moving on to the sideboard stuff, I think the card that stands out the most is the Teferi Time Raveler, because most people just love the card so much and they're playing it in their main deck, and I just think that Teferi Time Raveler place is in the sideboard because the floor of the 3 mana like Ripple-esque effect or Ripples-esque effect, sorry for that, in Modern isn't that high. It's actually pretty low, and if the passive of it isn't that great, I don't think it's a card that's worth main decking. Because like you can just play better cards. You can just play 3 mana instant speed cards that are forming more coherent or cohesive game plan. Also, I like the fact that Teferi gets better in certain matchups. It gets better after sideboard because people are bringing in cards like Choke, like Veil of Summer, and Teferi helps you in these post-board games when people are trading the speed for some resiliency, and then if they do this, Teferi is better against them. So I like bringing Teferi in those matchups, like against Green-White Heliod. I don't think Teferi is that great game 1 card against Heliod. And post-board, they're just gunning for you with their chokes, with their veils, and you can just play Teferi, and it's pretty strong there. Then we have sideboard Field of Ruin, which is also not very common. I treat it as a spell that can produce colorless mana from time to time. It's basically a card that can be just switched for like Sermon's Rejection. I just like that Field of Ruin is more versatile of a card than Sermon's Rejection, because there are some matchups against which you want it and you want to destroy like one specific land. For example, against Amulet, you want to get their Hasty land so they can't threaten you with Hasty Titans. Or against Spirits, you want to destroy Moorland Hound or whatever else. Cavern of Souls against each run. So I think it's just more versatile and better effect than Ceremonious Rejection. Especially in a deck with so many counter spells. You don't really need this like 15th counter spell or whatever, or 12th counter spell. You can just play a more unique effect. Another card that was kinda questioned by a lot of people is Elspeth Sun's Champion. I think it's a very good safety tool when people are trying to daredevil to match with mid-range cards. You can just slam Elspeth against like Giant, against like Stoneblade decks, stuff like this. It's also very important when you transform into this more like tap-out mid-range decks, which happens a lot against stuff like Death and Taxes or aforementioned Giant, or like Spirits, Humans, or maybe not Spirits, but Humans, Death and Taxes, Giant, this sort of stuff, Goblins. You just want to take out your counter magic and sideboard in a lot of removal spells, and then you want like one more Haymaker than you have in the main deck already, and Elspeth is very good for that role. I also like her against Dredge, because in this matchup you want to cast, like, one Chaos Guile isn't enough to beat Dredge, but two Chaos Guiles are often enough to slow them down by to the point in which you can just land Teferi or Elspeth and take over the game with it. So I think this is a fairly important part of the deck as well. And then the last card is Supreme Verdict over Wrath of God. I think right now it's just more important to have a second uncounterable sweeper against Spell Pierce out of Blue-Red Prowess than it is to have a differently named sweeper for humans. So that's pretty straightforward. But yeah, I think that's all I wanted to talk about. If you are watching this video on YouTube, then it's over a month old at least, and it's probably not even up to date. But you can just check out the link on my Patreon below, and you can get access to these videos weekly without any delays, and also to the guides, such as the guide I will post today for my Patreon for Esper, for the deck I was just talking about. It's around like 20 pages long, and it's covering over 20 decks, how to sideboard against them, some tips how to play against them, and like just overall tips and tricks section, deck construction part, and why I'm playing Esper over blue-black and blue-white in some more detail than I went over that in the video. But yeah, I'm gonna play this deck tomorrow on the showcase on March 6th, and then I'm gonna try and just play more with it in the coming weeks, and I hope you will come and watch me play it, maybe win, maybe lose. So yeah, all the links are in the description of the video, my Patreon, my Twitch, stuff like that. So that's all for me today, and I'm gonna see you next week. Bye bye.